So when they're looking through and they're scrolling through these real quick videos, that's what's happening. They're getting these dopamine hits that feel good, just the way it does when people sometimes use drugs or they use alcohol or they become addicted to other things. And so that's now kind of the frightening data to support what we've wondered all along, which is, yes, in fact, there is an actual neurological reason why looking at those kinds of videos is just so addicting.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Don't let them rain on your spark. Keep it close to your heart. All of the pressure's gonna drive you crazy.
That was Dr. Cheryl Ziegler unpacking what has become common knowledge of what social media does to teens and adults alike. But a new research from JAMA Pediatrics shows that not only are teens' brains being rewired, the chemical makeup of how teens' brains are functioning is leading us to understand how different it is for teens who are on social media versus those who are not, which can be a dark place not only for teens, but also for parents and those who care about young people. And that's what we're talking about today on the Celebrate Kids podcast in our daily segment, Facing the Dark. Because there are dark realities that we face in society, and we need to be reminded of the providence of God's guiding light in these challenging times. We find that in Scripture and through the wisdom of God's people. And today, we're turning for insight to Dr. Kathy Cook. Let's invite her into this conversation now. There's been a lot of recent reports, especially in pediatric journals, that talk about teens and the use of social media and different things. There's one that's really interesting that's come out recently that talks about there's observable alterations in brain chemistry for kids who use social media. And it notes that kind of these alterations are a little bit manifest, and we see them kind of the reality of them in terms of how students look at social rewards. So how they receive like correction and even how they respond to different things kind of socially. The study that I'm referencing had a pretty small sample size, but they did notice that social rewards and punishments were actually being able to be traced through brain chemistry based on how often and how much those students used social media. I'd love to hear some of your perspective on this because I know that you've written a book on this, you've talked a lot about this. As parents, how should we kind of approach this topic? At the very least, what are the things that we should be mindful of and aware of with this?
Wow. I could answer that last question in so many ways. You know, being aware of what your children are doing on the devices you've allowed them to use, where are they going and how many minutes and all those kinds of things. You know, specifically related to this idea that there's brain chemistry shift with rewards and punishments, I'm actually not surprised about that for two reasons. One is specifically for social media, we have the like factor. You know, you post on social media and then you watch the like factor. How many people will like it or, you know, heart it or thumbs up it or put the pray emoji, and how long will it take and how many people will share it? And if not enough people do, I'm going to have to go and post it again to make sure that more people recognize my brilliance. And so it becomes this, you know, competition with others perhaps, and it becomes like I can't be satisfied in my own skin that I had a good idea. I'm depending upon other people to tell me that I had a good idea. And, you know, when you and I were young, we had eye contact and we had facial feedback and we had body language and tone of voice. And we had maybe an inner confidence because our parents were more available to us because they weren't scrolling their own social media feeds. I don't say that to be harsh. I'm just speaking reality here, that if children's heart, mind, soul, and spirit is used to a like factor, then that's what they're looking for. That's not how the world works. They're not always going to get a like from a teacher when they do or say something, or from a date that they're hanging out with, or, you know, whatever. And then the other issue, and this is gaming on devices, and that can be done through social media as well, where you join a team and you're gaming and you've got people on your team from all over the world. Gaming can also be off social media. I recognize that you just have a platform and a game that you play. And if you've noticed, Wayne, and I only have 2 or 3 because they scare me, and they're very simple, but they scare me because they're so addictive. But they score everything for us. We don't have to self-evaluate anymore. So it tells me if I've done well. It gives me my points. I do a jigsaw puzzle. I enjoy puzzles, and I have my favorite app is a jigsaw puzzle app. I can control how many pieces and all that. It tells me how long it takes me. I don't care. I don't care if it took me 5 minutes or 5 hours. I'm having a good time. Like, leave me alone. And there's another little game I play and I can win points and I don't care. I just want to have a good time. Like, leave me alone. But for a lot of kids who are growing up with this, it's like, I scored this many points. How many did you score? And so, again, they're very used to somebody else telling them how they're doing. There's no need to self-evaluate, and they're very used to competition. And so I think those things I would be very concerned about, and that this is why having your kids stay away from social media and even all form of gaming as long as possible, I think is really wise. Hope that makes sense.
I run into this a little bit in my parenting circles where we kind of look around and it's natural for parents. And I don't know if this is because we've grown up in this same culture where it's all competitive and we're gaming and whatever, but it's natural for parents to kind of look around the room and say, okay, did my kid pull his cell phone out first? We're at a family function and somebody, we look at our nieces, our nephews and say, man, they're just addicted to their phone and they pulled it out first. And then, my kids might pull it out 20 minutes later, but at least we're parenting well here, right? And there's kind of this approach, I think, sometimes that I find myself even in, where I look at it and say, oh, that's kind of bad for you, but my kids have actually built different muscles for this, and I'd like to think that that's true. But I actually, after kind of reading this study, have this perspective that there actually is a little bit of a bar that everyone kind of hits with this. So what would you say to those parents that would kind of like look at that? And maybe I'm asking this for me. What would you say to me who in the right circumstance might say, well, at least my kids are kind of there? What is the reality for students, especially in this social media frenzy, that we really need to be mindful of, even if we don't see it maybe manifest for every kid that we have?
Addiction is real. Kids and adults are addicted to the adrenaline drop. We're addicted to the beep and the buzz and the ting and the ring. And so that's real. If your kids are able to have a conversation with people in the room and not need their phone for confirmation or whatever, that's a bonus. If your kids can make eye contact, if your kids can have a focused conversation and not be worried about, what they're missing out on their social media feed, praise the Lord. That's what you want. And that's why, again, the later that you have kids on social media, the better, because you want them to learn the social skills and the grace of honoring the person who's in front of you and respect and kindness and all those kinds of things that you raise your kids for. It's a brain development issue. The reason that a lot of adults are concerned about kids is that many of us began using technology after our brains were fully formed. And that's not true for kids. A man's brain is not finished until he's about 25, a woman about age 23. So prior to that, all the neurons are connecting and the synapses are forming. And the way that they'll forever communicate is largely being formed then. Now the brain is malleable. It's a muscle. You and I can change the way that we think and the way we function because God gives us so much free will and so much power there. But the reality is that for children, it's more damaging because if you allow them on technology a whole lot, they will always think that everything is fast, easy, about them, entertaining, and they get this like factor. And so they could end relationships quickly because they weren't liked enough, etc. So those are some issues for us to consider as well.
What would you say are some good, helpful tips then for us as we, train our kids, as we're parenting them, knowing that social media is just a little bit of a reality? Sports teams use it. Teachers are using it to communicate to students. What kind of approach or what would be some practical tips that you would give to us as we're parenting kids right now?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. Let me come back to what I was saying earlier, that potentially they're not learning to self-evaluate. So I think one important thing to teach children is the art of self-evaluation. If you allow your kids on social media and on gaming, believe me when I say that they are allowing someone else to always tell them how well they're doing. If you see that they can't evaluate how well they made their bed, how well they wrote a report, whether they were kind to their grandmother or not, if they tend to not be in touch with all that, then teach them those things. Talk with them about the need for their heart to know how well they've done before someone else tells them how well they've done. If you home educate your kids, ask them, how well do you believe you did on that report before you tell them what you think they did on that report. So that would be a very practical thing that's beneficial. And then let me say this, for all things that we teach our kids, I think it's a step-by-step approach. When a child learns how to play the piano, they typically start with scales, which are really boring. They start with right hand only. They begin to play a simple piece. Then after they're skilled at the right hand, the teacher allows them the privilege of adding the left hand. They get good at left and right hand together. Eventually they learn the foot pedal of the piano. And then maybe they accompany someone. There's a pattern. You begin to dribble the soccer ball in the backyard before you go and try out to make a team. And so the same thing with use of technology devices, social media. What if we start with them looking over our shoulder? Look at the picture of grandma and grandpa on their vacation. And they don't have their own account, but they look at your account and they find out why you follow who you follow. Maybe you have a favorite musician and you follow that musician. Right now, there's someone that I'm praying for that I've invited a lot of people to pray for. And I was just at the chiropractor and he asked me how this little boy is doing. And he follows that thread on my Facebook. There's a lot of good uses of this. And so teach your kids why you use it the way you use it, why you follow who you follow. And then you allow them to join social media at the right age when they've demonstrated that their character is ready for it, that they're not self-centered, that they're not impatient, that they're not self-absorbed. If they are already those things, it'll get worse with technology. So this is what we teach at Celebrate Kids, is make sure your character can handle the influence that social media and technology in general will bring your way. And then if you allow them on it, you allow them a little bit at a time, right? So family, friends only. So you can go onto social media and the only friends you're allowed to have at the beginning would be family. And maybe your piano teacher and your soccer coach, maybe your youth group. So you really limit, that's your right as a parent. And of course, you're a friend there too. Then you watch for maturity. You watch for responsible use. Do they comment? Do they like? Do they encourage? Or do they criticize? Do they post? Or do they only stalk what other people are posting? Are they still relating well face-to-face? Or are they always getting out their device to check about what's going on? You watch, and then, the consequence of inappropriate use is we take it away for a while. And the consequence for great maturity is you can add now 5 more friends or 5 more minutes or whatever it is that you would do as a parent. Individual decision based on your values. And I really appreciate that people are standing up and saying to their kids, in our family, this is what we will do. It doesn't matter what our neighbors and your cousins do. I'm not parenting them. I'm responsible only to the Lord for you. And this is what we've decided is best for you here.
Those words from Dr. Kathy can be incredibly encouraging for us, especially as we look to create a game plan on how to mitigate the influence of social media while also using it as a tool to help us as we continue to build meaningful relationships with not only teens, but those adults that are in our lives as well. And while Dr. Kathy's insights are really important, she works to ground her perspective in biblical truth. And so now we're going to turn to the biblical truth to find the guiding light and encouragement that we need for today. And today we're going to turn to Romans 12. This is where Paul is encouraging the church in a pre-Christian world. And many would look at our situation and say that we're in a post-Christian world. And Paul's words are an encouragement, not only for the church then, but also for the church now. And this is what Paul writes in Romans 12, verse 1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. That's an important reminder for us that as the culture continues to move fast and we get sucked into the way of thinking of the culture, that we need to pause, seek guidance and encouragement from the people that God has put around us, who have insight and perspective to drive us to a deeper relationship with the Lord. But we also need to turn to His Word so that we can be transformed into the likeness of Christ for this cultural moment. If this has been any encouragement for you today, I want to ask you to take this podcast and share it with your friend. If you have a couple minutes, leave a review for us on the podcast app that you're listening on. Those 2 things can help us continue to grow this ministry and continue to fulfill our design and our purpose here at Celebrate Kids, to give you hope during dark times. For Celebrate Kids, I'm Wayne Stender along with Dr. Kathy Cook, and we want to say thank you for listening, and we'll see you tomorrow.